So the clandestine agency that spends U.S. citizen monies in secret and is completely unaccountable to U.S. citizens, that agency was created in 1947, absorbing at least tens of thousands of Nazi war criminals and Nazi collaborators, which had been, who had been the intelligence infrastructure of Adolf Hitler in Eastern Europe.
Hello, Professor Francesco Gil-White. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for inviting me. Good to be with you, Moshe.
I came specially to speak with you because we had our very interesting conversation last time. So I'm honored to continue that conversation with you today. It seems like some of your assumptions, things that you said at the previous time, at our previous talk, making more and more sense. We're talking about the connection between the United States of America and Qatar and how it influences what's going on here in Israel. Can you put some light on that subject?
So what is it that has given you the impression that the model I defend has been performing well? What especially?
Well, we see, for example, that President Trump found a new friend. His name is Giuliani in Syria. And some strange things happening. Netanyahu has to speak to the head of Daesh, ISIS, in Syria right now, instead of eliminate the guy. Do you think there's any connection between those strange things?
Okay, so the model we have been defending, and which you are finding useful, says that all of the U.S. presidents are enemies of Israel. So there's no variation, no exception. The structure of the U.S. ruling elite is anti-Semitic. Why do I say this? It's very important to understand the fundamental structural architectural elements of this model, because if we get lost in the latest details, which I will discuss, but if we get lost in those, we cannot possibly understand them because we are missing the foundation. So what is the foundation? It depends how far back you go. But if we go, let us say, just to the immediate aftermath of World War II, and I want to start there. We have that the clandestine service of the United States, the CIA, in other words, the agency that spends the money of U.S. citizens in secret, because they have the power to do that. And for practical purposes, it's an infinite amount of money, right?
חבר'ה, אתם בבית, אתם צריכים להבין שיש פה תקשורת עצמאית שאין לה כיס עמוק, היא הקול שלכם, ואם יש תביעות מהסוג הזה, כולל נגד ערוץ טוב, כולל נגד גדי טאו ואחרים, האחריות שלכם גם לתמוך באנשים האלה. אם יסתמו להם את הפה, יסתמו לכם את הפה.
צופים יקרים, לשימת לבכם, נפתלי בנט תובע את ערוץ טוב על סך 250,000 ש"ח, לא פחות. אסור שזה יקרה. אם הוא ינצח בתביעה זו, ערוץ טוב עלול להיסגר. על כן בקשתנו, תמכו בנו, וכל הפרטים נמצאים בקישור שמתחת לנגן, ואנחנו נודה לכם על תמיכתכם.
So the clandestine agency that spends U.S. citizen monies in secret and is completely unaccountable to U.S. citizens, that agency was created in 1947, absorbing at least tens of thousands of Nazi war criminals and Nazi collaborators, which had been, who had been the intelligence infrastructure of Adolf Hitler in Eastern Europe. So this was called the Gehlen Org. It was put together by Nazi General Reinhard Gehlen when he was captured by the Allies after the war, he told them, hey, you know, I can put back together for you the entire intelligence infrastructure of the Nazis. And they said, great, do it. So that's what became the CIA. It was the Galen org. That's all it was. So if you create your clandestine service out of a multitude of Nazis, a giant multitude of Nazis, and this is the organ in your government that is importantly in charge of creating foreign policy, because that's where foreign policy is cooked, well, then you can expect that U.S. foreign policy will be anti-Israel. Of course, it's hypocritical. It's hypocritical because at least in the immediate aftermath of World War II, and for decades after that, direct American attacks against Israel would have been received very poorly by the American citizens. It would have caused a very strong negative reaction. Therefore,
so what you say here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this phenomena that you're talking about is not about the entire American society, but basically the CIA, and we all know that the State Department was always anti-Semite. We know that the Americans before 47, during the war, were very careful not to bomb Auschwitz, for example. We know that Henry Ford, for example, was the hero of Adolf Hitler, Ymach Shemo. His picture of Henry Ford, the famous car producer, was hanged on Hitler's office many years, and he was one of his major financial supporters before the war. So yes, we have these segments in the American society, and there was a survey published just lately that showed amazing amount of anti-Semitism in the American society, survey that showed that every fourth American willing to accept violence against Jews, yet it's not all the Americans, it's some of them, major amount of them, and you have also the other side. Even Trump himself as a Jewish grandchildren. So don't you think it will be a bit too extreme to put it as all the Americans will always be, all the American government will always be against us altogether? Isn't it too black and white kind of looking at the situation?
Well, I believe that when a situation is black and white, it should be described as black and white. I don't think that the American citizens are largely anti-Semitic. I think there is a big effort to make them anti-Semitic. I think that's going on. But so it's important to but they're not there yet. There's still a lot of support for Israel and the Jewish people in the United States. However, it's important to distinguish between American citizens and the American bosses, who are the tiny minority who really run things. And when you say the State Department has always been anti-Semitic, well, the State Department is a consequence of American presidents. American presidents appoint the secretaries of state. So there's no independence between the State Department and the president, even though people like to believe that. The State Department is an extension of the president, is an extension of the U.S. power elite. But in any case, the State Department is largely irrelevant. Policy is made and cooked at the CIA. So that's the organ that really matters. And if that organ was created by absorbing tens of thousands of Nazis, well, then you can expect that U.S. foreign policy will be anti-Israeli. When you look at the major aspects of U.S. foreign policy, They're all attacks against Israel. The Oslo process is the most important policy that the U.S. government has directed towards the state of Israel. And everything that is
I have to stop you here, just so you will always be correct in everything we say, because we're not saying simple things here, okay? The Oslo process, the concept of the Oslo process, as far as I remember, was a surprise for the Americans. It was created here in Israel by Shimon Peres and his gang. Yes, the Americans, after a short while, took it and developed it and backed it. It fit exactly any kind of anti-Semitism you're talking about, of course, and it led to the 7th of October. We all understand that, but it started here in the Promised Land, not overseas.
Well, my understanding of the history of the Oslo process is that it began with a research paper, quote unquote, by Graham Fuller. Graham Fuller was a CIA analyst who wrote this paper for the Pentagon. It was a RAND study. RAND is a think tank that is part of the Pentagon. And what Graham Fuller wrote in this paper, which is dated 1989, is the entire theory of the Oslo process. So what he said is the only way to get peace in the Middle East is to give Judea, Samaria, and Gaza to the PLO. Now, this is 1989 when he writes this paper. And immediately after this, Daddy Bush, George Bush Sr., started exerting tremendous pressure on Israel to participate in the Madrid Peace Conference of 1991. And in the Madrid Peace Conference of 1991, that's when the negotiations with PLO began. And it's true that Israeli bosses participated in this. I'm not going to deny that. You're right about that. And they bear a gigantic responsibility. But that doesn't mean that the U.S. government was not pushing for this. They were, and they pushed for it first, and they threatened Yitzhak Shamir with all kinds of consequences if he didn't go to the Madrid Peace Conference. Now, at the Madrid Peace Conference, the one who actually began the negotiations with PLO Fatah directly was Benjamin Netanyahu. He was the highest official of the Ministry of Foreign Relations of Israel present at the peace conference in Madrid in 1991. And he is the one who began the negotiations with PLO Fatah, thereby violating the secret taboo of Israeli politics, which up to then had considered completely prohibited taboo to have any kind of contact with the PLO. So it was from Netanyahu's 1991 negotiations that the platform was created for the Oslo negotiations, which were signed just 2 years later in the White House. So
let's jump from Netanyahu in 1991 to Netanyahu and Netanyahu's government in 2025. And how do you explain what's going on right now? As I said at the beginning, with Giuliani, and it looks amazing.
It makes perfect sense.
Happening. Yes.
It makes perfect sense. If again, going back to the CIA, if you have a clandestine service that can spend the money in the U.S. Treasury in secret, we're talking about the greatest concentration of money in history. If you can spend that in secret, which the CIA can, then you can corrupt anything. And so what they've been doing, what the Nazis in charge of the CIA have been doing, is they have been corrupting the entire West. And we are seeing the consequences of that today because the entire West is collapsing. Now, is Israel the exception? Of course not. If you are the Nazis and you control the CIA, which is what happens, then your interest is going to be to destroy the Jewish state, obviously, because you are the Nazis. So what are you going to do?
So,
well, the first thing you're going to do.
So how do you explain the fact that, that now, after the new Trump administration got into power, they running after those leftist organizations in Israel that burned the streets in 2023 in order to destroy Israel, and with what they call with $1 billion coming from U.S. aid. If their interest is to destroy Israel, why are they trying to stop it?
Okay,
stop
so
those people
we have
who did exactly that.
It's very important to distinguish between cosmetic moves or grammatically forced moves and policy. So as I was saying earlier, it's important for the people running the United States to maintain a hypocritical stance. They have to pretend to support Israel while undermining Israel. In order to convince people that they're supporting Israel, they will do symbolic things like moving the embassy to Jerusalem, like cracking down a little bit on USAID, right? The crackdown on USAID doesn't matter very much because they're allied, the CIA is allied with Soros, and Soros is going to still be the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, Soros Open Society Foundation. They're all going to still be supporting those very groups you're talking about. The only money that is drying up is the money that was directly coming from USAID. But the system that is supporting those groups is still in place and is still supporting them. So Trump's move to clamp down on the money that goes to these groups is entirely symbolic. The thing that really matters is what you pointed out at the beginning, that they're establishing relationships with Jolani in Syria. So the things you were pointing out before, like the fact that Trump is establishing relations with Jolani in Syria, that he is doing nothing to support the defense of the Druze, etc. That's what really matters, because it reveals that on the field of battle, where lives are lost, where the security of the Jewish state is critically at stake, in those junctures, Trump consistently undermines the security of the Jewish state. And in this, he behaves just like Biden and just like Obama.
And you think he's doing it on purpose?
Of course. Why would he not be doing it on purpose? People, listen, Moshe, just a second. The people running the United States are playing for world power. They don't do things superficially, and they don't do things casually. They plan very carefully every little thing they do. There is no emotion. There is no sudden reflex action. Everything is carefully planned, and they have a very long-term view. Why? Because they're playing for world power. This is not superficial.
And how do you think destroying Israel is helping Trump to gain more power?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is that Trump does not exist. What exists is a system of control from the clandestine services. And those people decide who becomes president. So Trump is just part of the deep state, just like any other president. It's all the deep state. There is no Trump. Trump is just a character. Look, you already know this. Trump came out of pro wrestling and reality TV. He's not a real person. There is no Trump. He is just whatever the deep state needs to project as an image at any particular time. That's what Trump is. And the same goes for Biden. And the same goes for every single president before him.
I think the picture is more complicated than you describe. There's definitely forces behind doing those things that you're talking about. I have no doubt that you're right about that. Yet there is room for the character. I had a bet, okay, before the first time he was elected, when he was still unknown person and no one took him seriously. I took a bet. This guy is going to win. I could smell it. Okay, and yes, he has a tremendous charisma. I'm sure that later on, when those forces that you're talking about notice the person They're starting to think how we use this person because he's a winning card. Okay? So of course there is a combination of all kind of forces over here, and definitely those forces that you're talking about are a major game player in the field. But I would not say that it's only them. It's some kind of dialect between all these forces. And Trump himself, to my opinion, or the way I see the guy, he's not focusing on anything besides power. He can go to three different directions in the same sentence. But that's the guy. Whatever catches, he will go with. So that leaves tremendous amount of ability. I'll tell you how I see the situation, and tell me what do you think about my theory. Okay? I think that after the 7th of October, the whole world expected Israel to turn down, to change all the rules. Nothing that happened before can continue the way it is. Not Oslo, not the Arabs in Gaza, nothing. I mean, after such a hit, everybody expect Israel to do something tremendously, okay? And it didn't happen, and we all blame the Biden administration. Now come Trump and tell you, throw them out. Comes with a Zehut party plan of help them. The last picture should be that the Gaza Strip should be clean from any Arabs. Comes from Trump, okay? Now, and later on he tells Netanyahu, until 12 o'clock next Sabbath, open all hell on Gaza. I think that Trump is a guy who admires power. And it doesn't matter if it's the Jewish power or the ISIS power. He admires power. And when he saw that the player, the Israeli player, is not taking control of the situation, he looked for different players. I think we changed his policy. Not that I see Trump as the Messiah. He has a good and a bad mixed up together in the same character. He can be very good for us. He can be very, very bad for us. But that depends on us. I think it was Netanyahu, okay, that led Trump to shake hands with Giuliani. This is my theory. Netanyahu with his weakness.
Well, it seems to me that your theory is not taking into account what I said at the beginning. So I think that if Israeli leaders like yourself continue to think about the world as a world where Trump is important as a person, where the president is important as a person, Israel will definitely be destroyed. I think that the model you need is a model where you take seriously that the world is run by the clandestine services. When you create an organization...
what do you think we should do? So what do you think we should do?
May I finish? May I finish? When you create a clandestine organization that can spend the money of the U.S. Treasury in secret, you have created a monster that can corrupt everything. And if that organization was created by Nazis, then you have to realize that the presidents don't exist. They're just a facade. They're a facade for the deep state to do what it needs to do. And so the president that is in office at any given time is going to be producing a theater that the deep state needs. When that theater is a president that seems to be pro-Israel because he does a couple of things that you might interpret to be pro-Israel, then the wishful thinking takes over, and people in Israel and other places start assuming that Trump or whoever is a friend of Israel. But what you need to look at is the policies that cost billions of dollars, because that's where the real intention of the people running the United States is. For example, the invasion of Iraq. The invasion of Iraq was a gift to Iran. It cost billions of dollars. The US government went in there, destroyed the government of Iraq, and installed a Shiite government controlled from Iran. And since then, the US has been pretending that Iraq is independent of Iran so they can send weapons to Iraq. All of those weapons are for Iran. Every single war that Israel fights, the US government stops Israel and doesn't let them win. It imposes ceasefires over and over again. It just did this again. It did it in Iran. Israel was bombing Iran. It was reducing the nuclear infrastructure. They could have continued until they produced regime change and got rid of the Ayatollahs. And what did Trump do? He immediately started begging the Ayatollahs to surrender so that he could impose a ceasefire on Israel. He said he wanted to save the Iranian Empire. He said it out loud. And then when the Ayatollahs didn't surrender because they couldn't, he dropped a few bombs on Iran so that he could take narrative control of the war and then impose a ceasefire on Israel. Look, it's obvious when Israel is beating the crap out of Iran and Trump imposes a ceasefire, he is a friend of Iran, not of Israel. Nothing could be more obvious. You're trying to find the smallest little behaviors that might be interpreted as pro-Israel in order to say that somehow Trump is an advantage for Israel. And you're trying to blame everything on the Israeli bosses. I get it. The Israeli bosses are guilty. I don't disagree with you. But that doesn't mean they're not working hand in hand with the American bosses. They're all together trying to destroy Israel. And if you think Trump is your friend, Israel will certainly be destroyed, because the strategy that Israel needs is one that recognizes that the main enemy of Israel, the one that has been constructing the destruction of the Jewish state, is the government of the United States. We need to communicate that to Israelis. We need to communicate that to diaspora Jews, and we need to communicate that to American citizens who care about the West and care about Israel. The longer we continue to cooperate with this management of reality, in which a government controlled by the intelligence services, which are themselves controlled by Nazis, is somehow a friend of Israel, the more we will contribute to the imminent destruction of the Jewish state. We have to get out of this mirage, of this movie that we're living in, because our reality is being managed.
Well, I certainly agree with many things you say. Definitely with the last part of your explanation about what's going on in Iran. But the question is, what can we do with that? When I look at what happened with these 12 days, the 12 days war in Iran, as they call it, okay? As Trump called it, okay? What I saw was a tremendous success of the Israeli forces, the Air Force, the Mossad, and all the forces, everything that Israel did. And then, at the second week, I started to see Netanyahu begging the United States of America, begging Trump to join forces, and everybody explains that we need the B-2s to finish the job because Israel don't have the ability to knock off the Fordo reactors, which is not true, by the way. Israel could have done it by itself in a few ways, okay? So the way I saw it is that Israel simply did not want to finish the job by itself from different reasons. I can get into those reasons the way I understand it, but the bottom line is...
I agree with you. I agree with you, Moshe. But see, the problem is, every time we discuss this, it seems like you're trying to convince me that Israeli bosses are bad. I agree with you. There's no disagreement there. I agree that Netanyahu doesn't want to win these wars. I agree. What I'm saying is that Netanyahu is working hand in hand with the American bosses. That's all. So you're right.
I have no doubt that you're right. I have no doubt that you're right about that. No doubt, okay, that you're right about that. But the question is that I want to ask you right now, assuming that tomorrow morning there's new leadership in Israel that understand the situation, how should it function? Disconnect from America, bring back our, close our embassy, what? Okay, we're dealing here with a serious base, an anti-Semite base in the American government, going back generations after generations. What should Israel do with that?
Israel, okay, good. So what Israel should do, if it is governed by someone who really wants to defend Israel and understands the situation, what it should do is it should stop dealing with the United States. When Israel is fighting Gaza, or when it is fighting Hezbollah in the north, or when it is fighting Syria, or when it is fighting Iran, whichever enemy it's fighting, if the U.S. says ceasefire, Israel says, sorry, I'm defending my survival. I'm not going to do a ceasefire. I'm going to win the war. Stop listening to the U.S. Develop your own military infrastructure so that you don't have to be begging for munitions, for bombs and so forth. And what Israel needs is to emancipate itself from this idea that survival depends on a relationship with the United States. It's the exact opposite. The aid that Israel gets from the United States is a tool that the anti-Semites in the United States who run the United States have used to take control of Israeli foreign policy. So there is no sense in which the survival of Israel depends on a relationship with the United States. It's the exact opposite. The relationship with the United States is what has been driving the state of Israel to destruction. Look, before the war of 1973, there wasn't very much of a relationship with the United States. Right. And Israel was winning all of its wars, and it was getting every single time a stronger and stronger position. So if you plot this on a timeline, and we're going to publish this very soon, we're going to show you that as time advances and the relationship with Israel gets deeper and deeper, the security of the Jewish state gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So
I definitely agree with your conclusion and most of your assumptions, but definitely with your conclusion, I agree. And as you know, as someone who read my book, I wrote a paragraph about it, and it's definitely true. Israel stopped winning wars since it started to get what the so-called American aid. You can show it, and I'm happy that you're doing this work. You can show it easy. It's just as this. But I want to ask you another question now. Do you see any other allies that Israel can turn to besides America?
Well, for now, Argentina.
That's what I thought.
But Israel, Israel should survive because it is the Jewish state, and it should win its wars because that's necessary for its security. If other people want to be allies, fine. But the policy of the Jewish state should not be predicated on somebody patting a Jew on the head. The Jews don't need anybody to pat them on the head. They need to defend themselves because they have a right to defend themselves, period. They don't need to be looking for allies. The allies should be looking for them because...
You know, Francesco, I could not agree with you more. Israelis for generations grew fed up with this nonsense and grew up to believe that the sun will not rise without the approval of the United States on top of the state of Israel. It is ridiculous. Israel today is one of the strongest economically, one of the strongest countries in the world. The income per capita in Israel today is higher than England, France, Germany. I think all Europe, almost all Europe. Maybe one or two countries still making more because of they're producing gas or something. But Israel, they need us not any less that we need them. We're not a small community of 600,000 Jews that just came out of the Holocaust and the independent war. We are a state of 10 million people that I think half of the money that is being invested today in Israel, in cyber, in the entire world, comes to Israel. Okay? So it's not that we don't need allies. You always need allies. Also, the superpower America need allies. Well, everybody needs everybody, but you have to realize who you are and be able to insist and standing behind your interests and not work for somebody else's.
Well, I agree with you that it's certainly good to have allies. I'm not disparaging the benefits of having allies, but pretending that your worst enemy is your best ally means you will surely be destroyed. You will surely be destroyed if you continue to pretend that the people trying to destroy you are your best friends. That's not going to work. You need
yeah, continue.
Go ahead.
I looked what happened with the Druze, and I wanted to tear my hair apart. Okay, Netanyahu promised the Druze in Syria the protection of Israel. Promised. Okay. It doesn't matter if it was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. Once he did that, he has to stand behind its word. It's the honor. It's the of the country as a regional superpower. Otherwise, they'll eat you alive. We're living here in a jungle in the Middle East. If you can't trust you, you're worth nothing, and you're destroying the ability. Or I mean, if you won't protect them, they will join with other forces. No one will make any commitment with you anymore. And it is obvious that the Israeli IDF were hesitate to stop these brutal butchers that raped and did all these horrible things and killed and what they did to the Druze because of an American
Why did they hesitate? What's the reason?
Because an American pressure. Yes. No doubt about it.
I rest my case. I rest my case.
No doubt. Definitely.
So I think the behavior of Netanyahu is perfectly predictable. I think Netanyahu has been a traitor from day one. I think he's a corrupt politician. I think he has been corrupted by the enemies of Israel, by the people who want to destroy Israel in genocide. And his behavior does not surprise me at all. But what the thing we were trying to explain from the beginning is the behavior of the U.S. government. And what you're telling me is that the very damaging behaviors that Netanyahu engages in have the cover of the U.S. president. It is the U.S. president that pressures openly and behind closed doors for these kinds of Israeli policies that only undermine the security of the Jewish state and of the Jewish people. So I really think that it is already very late. It is very late now for Israelis to be realizing just to what extent the U.S. government is their enemy. And I do think that the historical lesson is very important because, as you said earlier, this all began with the Oslo process. And what the Oslo process did was introduce PLO Fatah into militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state. And PLO Fatah, there's two things that everybody needs to know about PLO Fatah. One of them is that it was created by Haj Amin al-Husseini, the father of the Arab-Palestinian movement, who was directing the death camps, Adolf Hitler's death camps.
We spoke about that subject in our previous talk. I don't want to go over it again.
No. It needs to be repeated because people still don't understand it. And it's crucial. The Nazis created PLO Fatah So what was introduced into militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state is the Nazis. And the Americans did that. They pressured for this. Second, PLO Fatah is the creator of Iran. It was PLO Fatah that trained and armed Ayatollah Khomeini's guerrillas in Lebanon in the 1970s. This was on the front page of the New York Times in 1979. They explained it. And then they stopped talking about it so that they could do the Oslo process, so that everybody would forget. So they introduced the German Nazis and the Iranian jihadists into militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state. That's what the US did. That's what the American government did. These are the worst enemies of Israel. And until the people trying to fix the Israeli situation, such as yourself, really own this argument and start denouncing US policy as Nazi policy designed to destroy the Jewish people in genocide, until this argument is clearly made repeatedly, the argument you tried to get me not to say today, until this is done over and over and over again in all channels, in all patriotic channels, and we get this into the heads of all Israelis, you will not be safe. You will not be safe. The thing that's going to defend Israel is the realization that our reality has been managed and that we have been sucked into a process where the Jews are made to trust in the very people who are trying to destroy them.
I think what we learned from our history is that we can trust only ourselves.
That's right.
I think that there might be some arguments about what you said here and there, but the bottom line is that Israel should function and have policy according to its own interests, and not see itself as a servant of a different empire with a different interest. I think that what we saw at the 7th of October, that when, since Oslo, the Israeli defense forces created an assumption, a theory, that the United States of America and Israel have the same interests, and therefore we can stop produce many kind of weapons, that simple weapons, including bombshells, and let the Americans produce it, because at the time of war, of course they'll be with us and will give us everything we need. I think we learned it the hard way, that no.
Okay, but I think it's important.
Israel and America have different interests. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different, but the Israeli government, the Israeli leadership, and including the leaders of the army, should always look only for the Israeli interest and nothing else. And whenever there's a question, okay? I'll give you an example. How come, Francesco, how come every chief of staff of Israel, every head of the secret services in Israel, in order to get into his power, into his position, needs to get his approval from the American government? How could we trust commanders, top commanders in our army that owe their position to the Americans? It only happened when we lost. It only happened when we lost our identity. It goes back to the core of identity. Started to observe this concept that there's no national identities anymore, and put all our future and shells in the American basket. But you know what? Just to summarize it all, I don't care if they're anti-Semites or simply working towards their interests. If I would have been the president of the United States and had a strong state in the Middle East that's willing to do everything that fit my needs, I would accept it as well. I have no complaints to them, either if they're anti-Semites or not. I have only complaints to our leadership that simply could not function according to our interest and gave everything away to the Americans.
Well, now you're making my argument for me. I agree with what you said. I think that it's important to add, however, that it was the U.S. government that pushed very hard for the military dependence of Israel. So the history of this is that, for example, the example that is very clear is Israel was developing its own very advanced jet fighter, and
right.
Over and over. Forgive me?
Yes, I agree. Continue.
And over and over again, the Americans would offer lower prices for their equipment so that Israel would not develop its own. So there has been a very strong policy from the United States to cause the dependency. I am not saying that that the Israeli bosses did not cooperate with this. They did, but there was very strong pressure from the American government to sabotage the development of Israel's own armament industry. So once again, we see that what people consider to be aid or help coming from the United States, which it has to do with all of the weapons that the U.S. sends to Israel, etc. The surface of this is that it looks like U.S. assistance to Israel, but the reality is that that aid, quote unquote, is the payment that the people running the United States make in order to take control of Israeli geopolitics.
I think it was a very important discussion. I hope many Israelis will open their eyes to see this, to understand that situation. Israel should create a policy, and definitely many Israeli leaders understand it, do understand it, after the 7th of October, a policy that put Israel back on its own feet in many aspects, including the ability to produce its own weapons as much as can be, including of getting a relationship with many countries to get weapons from many countries, things that we cannot produce here, and no one can produce everything, including the Americans, okay? No one, but have a large variety of manufacturers that we not putting all the eggs in one basket, and of course, produce by yourself whatever you can, and when push comes to shove, work and function and fight according to your interests, and don't serve other countries' interests with the blood of your own soldiers.
That means not giving an inch of territory, not 1 inch, and expelling all of the terrorists from the Jewish soil. This is imperative.
Thank you very much, Francesco. It was delightful to speak to you, as usual.
Thank you for having me, Moshe. It's always a pleasure.
אוקיי, מאזינים, אני מקווה שנהניתם כמוני מהחוכמה והניסיון והידע המדהים, ההיסטורי של פרנצ'סקו. אפשר להסכים עם כל דבריו, אפשר להסכים עם חלק מדבריו. אני אישית חושב שהמציאות קצת יותר מורכבת מן האופן שבו הוא הציג אותה, אבל המסקנה היא בדיוק אותה מסקנה. ישראל חייבת להעמד על רגליה שלה, גם מבחינת החימושים, מבחינת הציוד שהיא צורכת מארצות הברית. התמיכה של ארצות הברית יצרה תלות שהתבררה ב7 באוקטובר כתלות פוגעת אנושות בביטחון המדינה. זו המסקנה המתבקשת בכל הנוגע ליחסים בין ישראל לארצות הברית מן ה-7 באוקטובר, ופרופסור פרנצ'סקו גיל וויט העיר על הנקודה הזו בצורה החריפה ביותר. תודה רבה לכולכם.
חבר'ה, אתם בבית, אתם צריכים להבין שיש פה תקשורת עצמאית שאין לה כיס עמוק, היא הקול שלכם, ואם יש תביעות מהסוג הזה, כולל נגד ערוץ טוב, כולל נגד גדי טאו ואחרים, האחריות שלכם גם לתמוך באנשים האלה. אם יסתמו להם את הפה, יסתמו לכם את הפה.
צופים יקרים, לשימת לבכם, נפתלי בנט תובע את ערוץ טוב על סך 250,000 ש"ח, לא פחות. אסור שזה יקרה. אם הוא ינצח בתביעה זו, ערוץ טוב עלול להיסגר. על כן בקשתנו, תמכו בנו, וכל הפרטים נמצאים בקישור שמתחת לנגן, ואנחנו נודה לכם על תמיכתכם.